Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we're discussing My Brilliant Friend Season 4, Episode 1. And I am very excited for this season. I have high expectations and I know that they will be met. The first episode was gorgeously shot and incredibly explosive. This season will take us deeper into Elena's mind as well as the volatile politics in Italy during this period. Now, as someone who's read the books, I am very impressed by how the show has stayed true to the text. The only difference is the show is very limited in terms of getting us to understand the inner workings of Elena's mind. So sometimes it can be difficult to have empathy for her or try to see things from her perspective. Now, episode 1, right off the bat, I really love the casting. The characters look different, but they definitely feel the same. The episode starts off with Christmas around the corner and we are reintroduced to Elena, who looks great. And at face value, it feels like all her dreams have come true. She's surrounded by her peers. However, appearances can be deceiving. Throughout the episode, she's constantly making these phone calls, and I really like the use of phone calls in this episode because they emphasize two things. First, how isolated she has become. She's been running around the world with Nino, declaring her love for him, and she's not really ready to face the consequences of that yet. The phone calls also emphasize how little she knows about Nino. Throughout the episode, she's constantly paranoid about who he's talking to, what he's really up to, and despite blowing up her entire life for this man, she still doesn't really trust him. I also love the use of doors and mirrors. Elena is not ready to look people in the eye and really own up to her decision. And the people that she is able to face, like Pietro's mom, she's really no different than at this point. I also love the atmosphere of this episode. If you watch Nino, he's always calling from a payphone or in the dark. So even before we find out that he's still with his wife and he's still living with his children, there are subtle signs that this guy is still as shady as ever. One thing I really enjoyed last season is how they were able to show Elena's paranoia and what exactly is going on in her mind. I think she hoped by leaving Pietro, she would find happiness and peace. And we see right off the bat that she's actually more anxious. Her insecurities have not gone away. In one scene, she literally wakes up imagining him with other women. She's always just trying to catch him in some type of act. And I think a huge red flag in someone that you're seeing or dating is if you wonder what they're doing when you're not around them. And Nino is an energy vampire. It's very clear that his life has been enhanced by Elena blowing up her life, but it doesn't seem like Elena's life has been enhanced. I did not see her working on anything. She seems exhausted. She doesn't really have time for herself. Like, all her energy has been going to Nino. And people like Nino, they will always be successful. They will always do well because they feed off the energy of those they prey on. Meanwhile, people like Elena will likely suffer a creative block. Being with him doesn't seem to be inspiring her to do anything. And while his career seems to be taking off and he's doing all these talks, hers is crumbling to the ground. And watching them run around like school children, it almost feels like she's trying to relive her college days, but with Nino this time, because when she was in college, we saw that she was very alone and isolated. And there's such a discrepancy between how Elena presents herself to the world and what's going on in her head or what's going on inside her. I love the use of archival footage of Italy during this time. It's a very tumultuous period, and Elena describes being with Nino as an opportunity to live her true life. I think Elena really has a desire to find her authenticity, to find her purpose, but the way that she's hanging around with Nino, this feels more like escapism. It feels like more of a distraction. And when we first see Elena this episode, it seems like they've reached the limits. Like, how much longer can they travel around before they really have to confront their families and really own up to what they've been doing? Elena's time kind of living in limbo is slowly coming to an end. And while Elena was traveling and making love with Nino, it seems like her children have been with Pietro and mostly living with their grandparents. And I think this episode makes it clear that there's no going back. Like, everyone in her family hopes that this is just a phase, that she'll come back, but she is never coming back. And throughout the episode, it does feel like everyone knows that Nino is still married, but they don't really want to tell her, or they don't really know how to tell her. And Elena's under the impression that the longer they can stay isolated and the longer they can kind of keep the world out, the happier they will be. But that's just not how life works. When she eventually does go home for Christmas, there's nobody there. So she calls Pietro's sister. And I really like this scene because it really feels like everyone in her life is kind of distancing themselves from her. Like Pietro's sister is being very polite, but you can definitely sense like a change in her vibe towards her. And by force, Elena and Pietro have to talk. And my first impression of Pietro this episode was he looks different, but he definitely feels the same. And he just seemed totally defeated. And I think he was hoping that this was a phase. And he seemed very open to taking her back. But after this explosive conversation, like there is no going back. Pietro has been in limbo himself. We see that he gets very angry in this episode. And this is not an emotion that we're used to seeing from him. This is a man who's very controlled and who's able to really check himself. And this scene with Elena, Pietro, and her mother, I felt was one of the highlights this episode. Elena basically tells Pietro, like, listen, I'm taking my daughters back and we are going to live in Naples. And Pietro doesn't have a problem with Elena taking care of her daughters. What he has a problem with is her trying to live in Naples with them, because as far as he's concerned, where she's from has made her prone to really bad behavior. It seems like this whole time she's running around with Nino, like this has been kind of a secret, but the secret is out. Pietro told her mother. And Elena and her mother could not be more different. They are just night and day. And I think this is the first time Elena's mother is seeing Elena for who she is, because again, there's this huge discrepancy between how Elena presents herself and what is going on inside her head. I think her mother is not only shocked that she left Pietro, but it's the way that she left him. I don't think Elena would have stayed with Pietro. I think this marriage was dead. And there was just like, it was not going anywhere. Like emotionally, mentally, she seemed completely finished with it. However, there's what you do and how you do it. It's one thing to leave your husband. It's another thing to cheat on him with a man like Nino, who is just a viper. At one point in time during this argument, Elena's mother compares her to Lila. And I think the difference between Lila and Elena, again, everything that we know about Lila is from Elena's perspective. But from what we can tell, there's very little discrepancy between how Lila presents herself and who she is. But this is not true in Elena's case. And the more we find out about Elena, you kind of wonder, like, how well does she really know anyone? And this is the first time, like, everything that's been going on inside her has come out. And so her mother and her ex-husband are just looking at her like, who are you? Like, they didn't know her at all. And to me, this argument really showcased how well Elena has been able to hide herself and mask herself from the world. And she makes it clear. Her priority is Nino. She will be with him any means necessary. There is no going back. And the way that she goes off with Nino, like, the episode makes it seem like it's a love story. However, we all know that it's not. And when Elena is reunited with her daughters, Dede and Elsa, they look at her like a ghost. Dede in particular, because she always knew that her mother was up to no good. So seeing her with Nino was just like a confirmation of that. Elena's desire to want to raise her children is a noble one, because despite her actions, she's still their mother. And she asks this question, like, what is the balance between what's best for me and what's best for her daughters? And I think staying in a loveless marriage just for the children is never a good idea, because children can feel it when two people hate each other, and this is not a healthy environment to grow up in. However, cheating on your husband with a man that is a cheater, like wrecking your home for a man that wrecks home, is never a good idea. And she's very aware that Nino is not someone to be fully trusted. Like, she kind of is fighting her instincts, and it's almost like she's using her daughters as leverage to prove that Nino is a loving and caring person. And if she's able to show that he is a father figure, he is someone that can care about someone outside of himself, then her decision is justified. And she left her family without really confirming whether or not he left his. Like, it doesn't even occur to her to confirm this. And I think the reason for that is she's scared that this image that she has of Nino is so far from reality. And again, I almost feel like she uses Nino as an excuse to leave her husband. Throughout the episode, and even throughout the previous seasons, like, she constantly pits Nino and Pietro against each other. And I think underneath all that, like, if we're trying to have empathy for Elena and the decisions she's making, I do think some part of her thinks she's, like, not a very good person. Like, she feels like she's a bad person. Both Nino and Elena grew up in very rough environments, and the way she talks about him, she kind of projects all these values onto him, that he's someone intelligent and passionate. Like, he only knows how to follow his heart. However, what she thinks of him versus what she actually knows about him. I mean, this is a man that has a whole son that he doesn't care for. And despite this knowledge, she still feels she's the exception to the rule, that somehow he will treat her differently than all the rest. Again, I don't think this is about Nino. I think she just has a very low opinion of herself. And Elena, this episode, is very torn. Mentally, emotionally, she's with Nino. However, logically, she knows she needs to take care of her daughters. And one scene that really struck out at me is when she's telling Pietro that she will move to Naples and she will like take her daughters. And he doesn't really fight her. And it really feels like he wants to tell her that Nino is still with his wife, because at one point in time, I think she mentions that he's staying with a roommate and he's living in a dorm. And Pietro looks like he wants to roll his eyes. Like he's just too tired, but he's also emotionally drained. And even though her decision is barely okay with Pietro, it's not okay with Pietro's parents, who are fed up with her. And I thought this scene with Adele and Elena was really excellent. Pietro's parents have been taking care of the girls, and they basically become their guardians at this point. And the idea of Elena just barging in and taking them, it doesn't seem like the right decision. In fact, it seems quite dangerous. And they were definitely in the right for being so concerned. And Elena tries her best to like put up a strong front. Like there's one scene where she's kind of playing with her girls and she looks as small as they do. Like she's too exhausted to be a parent, and she's trying to make these decisions that she thinks are right, but she doesn't really have the energy to follow through on them. Pietro's parents do their best to try and appeal to Elena's senses. Like, listen, you can go off with this man for as long as you like. Just please don't involve your daughters in something that's this messy. Adele has a wonderful line this episode where she's like, listen, you are way too taken with yourself to be a parent right now, so please take your time. And this just triggers Elena. Everything seems to be going very well until Adele's husband calls over the girls and asks them about their last name. And I love this scene so much because he's basically saying, like, your mother is trash. Like, forget about Greco. Okay, forget about that last name. And granted, his words were really disrespectful, but I think it really emphasized how distant Elena has become from her daughters and from her family. Like, Elena has shown no accountability this entire episode. She has gone into the relationship with Nino kind of a deer in headlights, and she is too smart to be playing this ignorant. She does not do her due diligence before leaving her family. And Pietro's parents are basically like, what is going on in your head? Do you know who Nino is? And Adele's husband, the way he basically read Nino for filth is perfectly accurate. He describes Nino as a parasite who will use anyone and anything to get ahead. And by the time you figure it out, it's too late. He is an energy vampire. Like, he will always find a way to make himself successful, to feed off people's energy. Basically, anyone who has the misfortune of coming across him will be left for dead. Despite all the evidence in the world, Elena still defends him. And I thought the scene with Adele was really wonderful, especially like the way it was shot, like face to face. The only person that she's able to confront quite aggressively is Adele. And I think it's because they have more in common than she would like to admit. They both have been living these double lives. They both lie to themselves constantly, but in different ways. From what we know of Pietro's mother, she has also had numerous affairs. And she doesn't have a problem with Elena having an affair. What she has a problem with is airing out her dirty laundry to the rest of the world. And in Elena's defense, people like Adele are actually worse than people like Elena, because they hide behind etiquette and good manners to hide otherwise poor character. And Pietro's family has the benefit of appearance, like they look like a well-rounded family. But when you peel behind the curtain, you realize that they're just a dirty mess. And Elena, you know, for better or worse, her argument is like, listen, you can hate it, you can love it, I'm just being honest. Like, this is how I feel, and this is what I'm doing. And in the end, it seems like Elena will be able to get her daughters back, but again, it's like, at what cost? The episode ends and we see Lila for the first time, and I thought the actress who plays Lila was perfect because she literally feels like the same person. And by force, she tells Elena that not only has Nino not left his family, he's actually been promoted with the help of his father-in-law. And again, Nino is a parasite. He will use children. He will use whatever he can get to advance himself, but all of it is meaningless. Like, everyone's just kind of a pawn in his game. Elena doesn't want to hear it. I mean, she looks shocked by the end of the episode, But some part of her is not surprised. I mean, she's kind of been living in La La Land in this fantasy world with him. And now that she knows the truth, how much longer can she justify this relationship and this affair? And I think it takes a very strong person to just leave a relationship, right? Like, there's a difference between saying, listen, I no longer want to be in this marriage and I want to be alone. That you can respect. The fact that she not only ran away with Nino, but doesn't even really confirm whether or not anything he's saying is true, I think is very telling. Because I think ultimately Nino was an excuse to blow up her life. She constantly throughout the episode proclaims her love for him, claims that, you know, this is true love and he's a good person and he'll take care of their daughters. And the more that she defends him and the more that she tries to convince the world that this is true love, like, it's a sad attempt to make her seem a lot stronger than she really is. And now that she knows the truth about Nino, how much longer can she use him as a shield to avoid facing herself? Like, this will be the question this season. So you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.